Take off that cap! You haven't earned anyone's respect!
Respect isn't something you can take away.
Look at this. Officer Brandon Cole sneered as he ground the cap beneath the heel of his polished boot. Then he jabbed a finger hard into the older man's chest. A black man dressed in that worn-out jacket actually expects people to believe he's some kind of decorated hero. Around here, respect has to be earned. The crowd fell silent. Malcolm Hayes, a dignified black veteran in his late 50s, stood perfectly still. His faded jacket, old boots, and calm expression made him look like an ordinary man who had simply come to honor fallen soldiers. Brandon looked him up and down before laughing again. "You know what I see. Just another old black man hiding behind a cheap cap, hoping people will salute a story nobody believes." A few officers behind him smirked. Brandon wasn't finished. He leaned in until only inches separated their faces. "Men like you always want the country to thank you. But judging by those clothes, I'd say the country already forgot you. Maybe it never owed you anything in the first place." Several veterans in the crowd clenched their fists. An elderly woman whispered, "Please, don't do this." Instead, Brandon snatched the cap from the ground, tossed it back into Malcolm's chest, and sneered one last time. "Pick it up, old man. That's probably the only respect you'll ever get." Without another word, he drove a brutal punch into Malcolm's face. The crack of the blow echoed across the Memorial Plaza. Phones shot into the air. A woman screamed. Several veterans rushed forward before officers blocked their path. Blood gathered at the corner of Malcolm's mouth. Yet Malcolm neither flinched nor fought back. He simply met Brandon's furious stare with a quiet dignity that unsettled everyone watching. What Brandon didn't know was that the black veteran he had just humiliated had once trained the very chief of police who would soon walk through those doors, and when that truth came out, an entire department would be forced to answer for one officer's arrogance. Before we reveal what happened next, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. If you believe no one deserves to be judged by appearance, leave a comment saying, "Respect must be earned, not demanded." And if stories of justice, courage, and unforgettable payback inspire you, subscribe so you won't miss the moment this officer realizes exactly who he chose to humiliate. Shaukatyum. Welcome back. Every road has a story, but it's the people along the way who teach you how to read it. 2 hours earlier, before the flashing patrol lights, before the punch, and before the city would begin questioning everything it believed about one of its own officers, Malcolm Hayes had left his small brick house on the quiet east side of Savannah. He paused on the front porch, adjusting the faded Army veteran's cap that had accompanied him to every Memorial Day ceremony for nearly 3 decades. His wife, Angela Hayes, stepped outside carrying a neatly folded American flag lapel pin. "You forgot this," she said softly. Malcolm smiled. "I never forget. I just like knowing you'll remind me." Angela fastened the pin to his worn jacket and brushed an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone anymore." "I know. You've already given enough." Malcolm looked toward the bright morning sky. "You never stop honoring the people who didn't get to come home." Angela squeezed his hand. "Just promise me you'll come home before dinner." "I will." Neither of them could have imagined how impossible that promise would soon become. Veterans Memorial Plaza buzzed with life. Families wandered between rows of American flags. Children carried miniature banners. A military band rehearsed patriotic songs beneath the shade of ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Retired service members greeted one another with firm handshakes and quiet smiles. Malcolm preferred staying near the edge of the crowd. He never enjoyed attention. When strangers thanked him for his service, he always answered the same way. Thank the families who waited for us. They carried the heavier burden. That humility had earned him respect from countless people throughout his life. Yet today, nobody around him recognized his face. To most visitors, he appeared to be nothing more than an aging black veteran wearing an old jacket that had seen better days. Exactly the kind of man Officer Brandon Cole believed he understood. Brandon arrived at the plaza with two fellow officers, Jason Miller and Sergeant Marcus Reed. He had volunteered for event security for one reason: visibility. The mayor would attend. Local media would be everywhere. Every interaction was another opportunity to appear decisive. He straightened his perfectly pressed uniform before glancing across the gathering. His eyes quickly settled on Malcolm. Old jacket, scuffed boots, weathered cap, standing alone. Easy target. Brandon smirked. "See that guy?" he muttered to Jason. "The one by the memorial." Jason nodded. "Looks harmless." Brandon chuckled. Harmless people usually make the easiest headlines. Marcus Reed frowned. "Leave him alone unless he gives you a reason." Brandon ignored him. "I'll decide who deserves attention." Malcolm quietly placed a single white rose beneath the engraved names of soldiers who had never returned home. For several long seconds, he closed his eyes. He silently recited names that no longer appeared in newspapers. Friends, brothers, men who had laughed with him around campfires before disappearing forever into history. A young boy noticed Malcolm saluting. "Mom," the child whispered, "why is that man crying?" His mother looked over. "Because sometimes heroes remember things we'd never understand." Malcolm quickly wiped the moisture from his eyes before anyone else noticed. He turned to leave. "Sir." The sharp voice froze the peaceful atmosphere. Officer Brandon Cole strode toward him with deliberate confidence. "I need to see your identification." Malcolm offered a polite smile. "Certainly." He slowly reached into his wallet and handed over his driver's license. Brandon barely glanced at it. "You carrying any weapons?" "No." "You sure?" "Yes." Brandon looked him up and down again. "You don't exactly look trustworthy." Several nearby visitors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Malcolm remained calm. "Officer, is there a problem?" Brandon folded his arms. "That depends." He pointed toward Malcolm's veteran identification card. "What's that?" "My veteran ID." Brandon pulled it from Malcolm's wallet without asking. He flipped it over several times before letting out a mocking laugh. "I've seen fake IDs that looked better." A ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd. One elderly Marine stepped forward. "Son, that's a real veteran's card." Brandon didn't even look at him. "I wasn't asking for opinions." Marcus Reed approached quietly. "Brandon." "Not now." "Give him his card back." Brandon shrugged. "I'm still verifying it." Malcolm spoke with remarkable patience. "Officer, if you need to verify it, that's perfectly fine, but I'd appreciate it if you handled it carefully." Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you're giving me instructions." "No. I'm simply asking for respect." Brandon laughed so loudly that several television cameras turned toward the commotion. Respect, he held the card high for everyone to see. Respect isn't printed on plastic. Jason Miller snorted. A few uncomfortable laughs came from bystanders who didn't yet understand what was happening. Others looked away, embarrassed. Emily Carter, an investigative reporter covering the ceremony, noticed the growing crowd. She immediately lifted her camera. Her instincts told her this wasn't a routine security check. Something about Brandon's body language felt wrong. Too aggressive, too eager. She quietly began recording. Nearby, David Thompson raised his phone and started filming as well. Neither Brandon nor Jason seemed to notice. But Marcus Reed did. His stomach tightened. He had worked with Brandon long enough to recognize the dangerous look in his eyes, the look that always appeared just before he crossed a line. Marcus took one slow step forward. Brandon. This time his voice carried unmistakable warning. End this. Brandon smiled without taking his eyes off Malcolm. Oh. I think we're just getting started. The plaza moments earlier filled with music and laughter had fallen into an uneasy silence as dozens of strangers instinctively moved closer, sensing that something far more serious than a simple identification check was about to unfold. Brandon slowly lowered Malcolm's veteran identification card, staring at it as though it were nothing more than a worthless piece of plastic. Then, without warning, he flicked it with his thumb. The card spun through the air before landing face down in a muddy patch beside the memorial walkway. Several people gasped. Malcolm's eyes followed the card, but he made no move to retrieve it. For a brief moment, disappointment crossed his face, not because of the card itself, but because it had happened only a few feet from the names of soldiers who had given everything for their country. Brandon smirked. Go ahead. He nodded toward the mud. Pick it up. Malcolm remained still. I'd appreciate it if you returned it yourself. Brandon laughed. You'd appreciate it. His voice grew louder so everyone nearby could hear. I don't work for you. The silence around them became almost unbearable. Parents quietly pulled their children closer. Veterans who had been exchanging stories only minutes earlier now stood frozen watching an officer humiliate one of their own. An elderly Navy veteran stepped forward, his cane tapping against the concrete. Officer, he said firmly, that's enough. Brandon shot him an icy glare. Sir, unless you're part of this investigation, I'd suggest you keep walking. There is no investigation, the old veteran replied. You're harassing him. Jason Miller folded his arms with a grin. Our officer knows exactly what he's doing. Marcus Reed's jaw tightened. He looked from Malcolm to Brandon, struggling to decide whether stepping in would end the situation or only make it worse. Malcolm finally bent down not to obey Brandon, but to keep another veteran from trying to retrieve the card first. He carefully wiped the mud from its surface with a folded handkerchief. The movement was slow, respectful, almost ceremonial. Brandon watched with obvious satisfaction. There you go. He clapped sarcastically. I knew you'd listen eventually. Malcolm slid the card back into his wallet before looking calmly at Brandon. Have I broken any law? Brandon shrugged. I'll decide that. No, Malcolm answered quietly. The law decides that. A few people in the crowd exchanged approving glances. Brandon's smile disappeared. He hated being challenged, especially by someone who refused to raise his voice. He stepped closer until they were nearly face to face. You think you're clever. I think we're standing at a memorial where respect should matter. Brandon leaned in. You know what I see. His voice dripped with contempt. I see an old black man hiding behind stories from 50 years ago because he has nothing left. The insult rippled through the crowd. Several veterans shook their heads in disbelief. Emily Carter kept recording. She zoomed in on Malcolm's expression. No anger, no hatred, only quiet restraint. That restraint somehow made Brandon look even worse. Trying to regain control, Brandon suddenly reached forward and snatched Malcolm's faded veteran's cap from his head. The motion was so abrupt that several people cried out. He turned the cap over in his hands. "Look at this thing." He laughed. "This belongs in a thrift store." Before anyone could react, Brandon tossed the cap onto the pavement. His polished boot came down hard, the brim bent beneath the weight. One elderly woman covered her mouth. Another veteran whispered, "Please don't." Malcolm stared at the crushed cap. His breathing slowed. For just an instant, memories flooded back. That cap had accompanied him through every Memorial Day since leaving the Army. His late commanding officer had handed it to him on the day they buried 3 members of their unit. It was never about the fabric. It was about the promise to remember. Brandon mistook Malcolm's silence for fear. "What's wrong?" "I thought soldiers were supposed to be tough." He nudged the cap with the toe of his boot. "Or maybe you're only brave when someone else is fighting for you." Marcus finally stepped forward. "Brandon." His voice was firmer than before. "Enough." Brandon didn't even look at him. "I'm conducting official business." "No, you're humiliating a citizen." Brandon turned sharply. "Whose side are you on?" Marcus answered without hesitation. "The laws." That single sentence hung in the air. Jason Miller looked uneasy for the first time. Meanwhile, David Thompson continued filming from only a few yards away. His phone captured every insult, every shove, every second of Malcolm's remarkable self-control. Emily quietly whispered into her microphone. "Timestamp 10:17 a.m. Officer Brandon Cole continues escalating confrontation despite no evidence of criminal activity." Malcolm slowly picked up the crushed cap. He brushed away the dust with careful hands before placing it back on his head. Then he looked directly into Brandon's eyes. "You still have time to walk away from this." Brandon scoffed. "Is that supposed to be a threat? No. It is advice." The answer only fueled Brandon's anger. He grabbed Malcolm by the front of his faded jacket, pulling him forward. The crowd erupted. "Let him go." "What are you doing?" "Someone stop him." Several veterans instinctively stepped toward the confrontation, but uniformed officers quickly blocked their path. Brandon's face was now only inches from Malcolm's. "You don't tell me what to do." Malcolm's voice remained steady. "I'm asking you to remember what that badge represents." Brandon sneered. "This badge represents me." For the first time all morning, genuine disappointment appeared in Malcolm's eyes. Not fear, not hatred. Disappointment. He quietly replied, "No, officer. That's exactly where you're mistaken." Those calm words ignited something reckless inside Brandon. His right fist slowly tightened. Around them, dozens of smartphones remained raised. Every lens focused on the same terrifying moment. Everyone could see what was about to happen. No one imagined that the next few seconds would change the careers of multiple officers and eventually force an entire police department to confront the man they had chosen to disgrace. For one long second, the entire Veterans Memorial Plaza seemed to stop breathing. Brandon's clenched fist hovered only inches from Malcolm Hayes's face. Then it happened. His fist exploded forward. The sickening crack echoed across the memorial as Malcolm's head snapped to the side. His veteran's cap flew from his head once again, tumbling across the concrete, before coming to rest beneath a row of small American flags planted beside the monument. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Someone screamed, "No!" An elderly Marine instinctively rushed forward, only to be restrained by 2 officers trying desperately to contain the growing chaos. Blood slowly formed at the corner of Malcolm's mouth. Yet he didn't swing back. He didn't shove Brandon. He didn't even raise his hands. Instead, he slowly straightened his posture, wiped the blood away with the back of his hand, and looked directly at the younger officer with the same calm expression he had carried all morning. That calm terrified Brandon more than any punch ever could. "What?" Brandon barked. "You finally run out of smart remarks," Malcolm answered quietly. "No. I've simply learned that some battles are won the moment you refuse to become the person standing in front of you." The words landed harder than any physical blow. For a split second, uncertainty flashed across Brandon's face. Then his pride returned. "Oh, spare me the old soldier speech." He turned toward the crowd and spread his arms dramatically. Everybody saw it. He became aggressive. "I defended myself." Several people immediately shouted back. "That's a lie. Jude, he never touched you. You hit him first." Emily Carter never lowered her camera. Every second had been recorded from the moment Brandon demanded Malcolm's identification. David Thompson stepped closer, raising his phone. "I got the whole thing." Brandon's head snapped toward him. "You recording police activity? It's legal." Brandon walked directly toward David. "Hand me your phone." David tightened his grip. "You need a warrant." Jason Miller immediately stepped beside Brandon. Failure to cooperate can become obstruction. Emily stepped between them. "No, it can't." She held up her press credential. "I'm Emily Carter with Channel 8 Investigations. My camera has been recording continuously. So has his. You touch either device and every attorney in this city will know before lunchtime." Brandon hesitated. He recognized the station logo. For the first time that morning, he realized this confrontation might not disappear as easily as the others had. Marcus Reed quietly approached Malcolm. "You need medical attention." Malcolm shook his head. "I'll be fine." "You should file a complaint." Again, Malcolm shook his head. "I'll give your department every opportunity to do the right thing first." Marcus stared at him. "After what just happened?" Malcolm looked toward the memorial. "I wore this country's uniform for 24 years. I refuse to believe every badge has forgotten what that uniform represents." Those words hit Marcus harder than he expected. Because deep down, he knew Brandon had crossed a line no officer should ever approach. Yet he also knew how these cases usually unfolded. Reports could be rewritten. Body camera footage could mysteriously become incomplete. Witnesses could lose confidence. Careers could quietly protect careers. Brandon suddenly spoke into his shoulder radio. "Dispatch. This is Officer Cole. I need an incident report started." He glanced toward Malcolm before deliberately choosing each word. Subject became verbally confrontational. Displayed threatening behavior. Minimal force was used to gain compliance. Marcus stared at him in disbelief. "That's not what happened." Brandon lowered the radio. "Then write your own report." "I will." "Good." Brandon leaned closer. "Now just remember who the captain usually believes." Marcus said nothing. But something inside him shifted. For years he had looked the other way, whenever Brandon's arrogance crossed the line. Today had become impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, Emily had already uploaded a short preview clip to her newsroom. Within minutes, producers began calling. "Stay live. Keep filming. This is getting traction." None of them realized just how quickly the footage was spreading online. Across Savannah, phones vibrated one after another. Veterans shared the clip. Military families reposted it. Former officers expressed outrage. Comments poured in faster than anyone could read them. Who is that veteran? Identify the officer. Fire him. Disgraceful. Back at the memorial, Malcolm finally walked toward the fallen cap. He picked it up carefully. The brim had been bent where Brandon's boot had crushed it. He smoothed it gently with both hands. An elderly Gold Star mother stepped toward him with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry." Malcolm offered her a faint smile. "You don't owe me an apology." She looked toward Brandon. "No. But someone does." At that very moment inside police headquarters nearly 10 miles away, a dispatcher named Olivia Bennett noticed an alert attached to the rapidly circulating video. The title caught her attention. "Officer strikes elderly black veteran during memorial ceremony." She clicked play, only 20 seconds in. Her expression changed completely. This doesn't look right. Without wasting another second, she forwarded the footage to the Internal Affairs Review queue, then attached an urgent note. Possible excessive force. High public visibility. Recommend immediate command review. The notification quietly appeared inside the secure inbox, reserved for senior command staff. It was only one among dozens of routine reports. But within the hour, it would be opened by the one man in the department whose life had been forever changed by Malcolm Hayes years earlier, Chief Daniel Brooks. Neither Brandon nor anyone else standing at the memorial had the slightest idea that the first domino had already fallen. And once the chief saw the face of the quiet black veteran, everyone had underestimated the entire foundation of Brandon Cole's career would begin collapsing. Less than 30 minutes after the confrontation at Veterans Memorial Plaza, the video had spread far beyond Savannah. A retired Marine in Texas shared it with the caption, "If this is how America treats her veterans, every citizen should be paying attention." Within minutes, thousands of comments flooded social media. Some demanded Brandon Cole's badge. Others wanted to know the identity of the quiet black veteran who had refused to fight back. No one yet knew his story. Brandon, however, wasn't worried. He leaned comfortably against the hood of his patrol car while Jason Miller scrolled through his phone. "You've gone viral," Jason said with a grin. Brandon smirked. "Good. Half the city thinks you're a bully. The other half thinks I'm keeping order." Jason shrugged. "Controversy makes careers." Marcus Reed overheard every word. He couldn't believe Brandon was treating the incident like free publicity. "You're making a huge mistake," Marcus said. Brandon looked at him. "No. My mistake would have been letting him embarrass me." Marcus stared. "He never embarrassed you. You embarrassed yourself." Brandon laughed. "You sound like Internal Affairs." Marcus answered quietly. "Maybe they should." For the first time, Brandon's smile faded. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat alone on a wooden bench outside the memorial. A volunteer medic had cleaned the cut near his mouth. Angela arrived only minutes later after seeing the video online. She hurried across the plaza. "Malcolm!" He stood as she reached him. Without saying a word, she gently touched the bruise beginning to darken beneath his cheekbone. "I told you to come home before dinner," she whispered, trying to smile through tears. "I still intend to. You were assaulted. I know. And you're still protecting them." Malcolm shook his head. "I'm protecting something bigger than them." Angela understood exactly what he meant. He wasn't protecting Brandon. He was protecting the honor of the profession Brandon had disgraced. Emily Carter approached cautiously. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm turned. "I'm Emily Carter with Channel 8. I know who you are. I'd like to interview you." "No." Emily blinked. "You don't want your side heard." "I want the truth heard." "Those aren't always the same thing." She lowered her microphone. Then help me understand. Malcolm looked toward the memorial. I spent 24 years teaching young soldiers that anger is contagious. If I answer anger with anger, then everyone loses. Emily remained silent. She had interviewed politicians, celebrities, and police chiefs. Very few people possessed Malcolm's quiet certainty. Can I at least ask one question? He nodded. Why didn't you hit him back? Malcolm smiled faintly. Because I won that fight the moment I decided he wouldn't choose the man I became. Emily slowly lowered her notebook. That sentence alone was worth more than any headline. Across town inside Savannah Police Headquarters, Olivia Bennett watched the video's view count climb past 2 million. Every few seconds, another email arrived. Veterans organizations, civil rights groups, former officers, state representatives, even the governor's office had requested preliminary information. Olivia quietly muttered, "This isn't staying local." She forwarded another package of evidence to Internal Affairs. Attached were 3 separate cell phone videos. Each showed the same thing. Brandon initiating every confrontation. Captain Linda Morales, head of Internal Affairs, entered her office carrying coffee. Olivia intercepted her before she reached the door. "Captain, you need to see this." Linda accepted the tablet. She watched the first clip, then the second, then the third. Each angle confirmed exactly what the previous one had shown. No threats, no resistance, no justification, only escalation. Linda's expression hardened. "Has Brandon submitted his report?" 5 minutes ago. Linda opened it. Her eyebrows slowly rose. Subject displayed aggressive posture. Officer used reasonable force in self-defense. She closed the file. "That's not what these videos show." Olivia nodded. "No, ma'am." Linda looked toward the command offices. "Don't notify Brandon." "Not yet." "I want every body camera file secured before anyone has time to edit a single second." "Yes, Captain." At the same time, Brandon sat in the report room with Jason. He confidently typed his statement. Every sentence shifted blame toward Malcolm. Every paragraph painted himself as a calm professional forced into action. Jason glanced over. "You sure nobody recorded the beginning?" Brandon shrugged. "People record everything. They never record enough." He clicked submit. There. Problem solved. Neither officer noticed Marcus Reed standing outside the partially open door. Marcus had just finished writing his own report. It contained one sentence that would soon shake the department. Officer Brandon Cole initiated unnecessary physical contact with Mr. Malcolm Hayes despite no observable threat to officer safety. Marcus stared at the words. He knew exactly what submitting them meant. Friends would disappear. Promotions would vanish. His career might never recover. He thought about Malcolm standing silently beneath the memorial after being punched. Then he pressed submit. Back at the memorial, David Thompson finally approached Malcolm. "I think you should have this." He handed Malcolm a business card. "If anyone deletes evidence, I've already backed up every video. 3 different cloud servers." Malcolm accepted the card. "Thank you." David smiled. "My grandfather served in Vietnam. I couldn't just stand there." Malcolm shook his hand. "You honored him today." As the afternoon faded, Malcolm quietly prepared to leave. He placed one final salute toward the memorial before walking slowly toward the parking lot with Angela. Neither of them noticed the black SUV that had just entered police headquarters downtown. Chief Daniel Brooks had returned early from a regional law enforcement conference. His assistant met him before he reached his office. Chief, you have an urgent internal affairs review waiting. Daniel sighed. What happened now? A use of force incident. High profile? The videos are disturbing. Daniel loosened his tie. I'll look at them after I finish today's briefings. His assistant hesitated. I think you'll want to watch this one first. Daniel nodded and stepped into his office. Outside, Captain Linda Morales stood holding a folder labeled Malcolm Hayes. She had no idea why that name felt strangely familiar. Inside the office, Daniel clicked play. The first image froze him before the video had even reached the 10-second mark. He leaned closer to the screen. His heartbeat suddenly quickened. That can't be. He whispered the words almost to himself. I know that man. Chief Daniel Brooks stared at the paused video on his monitor. The image was slightly blurred, captured by a bystander's trembling cell phone. But the older black veteran's posture was unmistakable. Straight back, hands relaxed at his sides, calm eyes that never searched for conflict. Daniel instinctively leaned closer. No, he whispered again. It can't be. His assistant, Rebecca Lawson, looked confused. Chief, Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he clicked play. The room fell silent except for the voices coming from the speakers. Brandon's insults echoed through the office. Daniel watched the officer throw Malcolm's veteran ID into the mud. He watched the cap being crushed beneath Brandon's boot. Then came the punch. Daniel's jaw tightened. His fingers curled so hard around his pen that it snapped in half. For several long seconds after the video ended, he said nothing. Rebecca had worked beside him for 6 years. She had never seen him react this way. Finally, Daniel spoke. Who is handling this investigation? Captain Linda Morales, sir. Bring her here. Immediately. Less than 3 minutes later, Linda entered carrying the investigation file. You wanted to see me, Chief? Daniel pointed toward the frozen image of Malcolm on the screen. Tell me everything. Linda opened the folder. Victim identified as Malcolm Hayes. Age 58. Retired Army Special Forces. No criminal history. Highly respected in the local veterans community. Daniel interrupted. Only that Linda frowned. That's everything we've confirmed. Daniel slowly stood. No. That's nowhere near everything. Linda looked puzzled. You know him. Daniel walked toward the window overlooking the city. For nearly 20 years, he had kept one object inside his office that nobody had ever questioned. A worn leather notebook sat inside a locked display cabinet. He unlocked it carefully. The cover was faded. The pages were yellowed. Inside the front cover were 7 handwritten words. Lead yourself before you lead others. Daniel gently ran his fingers across the ink. I've carried this notebook since I was 23. Linda waited quietly. I didn't write those words. He turned another page. Every lesson, every leadership principle, every note about restraint under pressure, all written in the same precise handwriting. Malcolm Hayes. Linda looked back toward the monitor. You mean? Daniel nodded slowly. He taught me. 29 years earlier, Fort Benning, Georgia. Daniel Brooks had been a 23-year-old Army Ranger candidate with endless confidence and very little patience. He had believed strength meant winning every confrontation. Then he met Master Sergeant Malcolm Hayes. The first lesson Daniel ever received had lasted less than 30 seconds. Young Daniel had lost his temper during a training exercise. Instead of yelling, Malcolm simply handed him a mirror. Daniel remembered the conversation perfectly. What do you see, Chuckton? Myself. No, Malcolm had replied. I see a man letting someone else control him." The words had haunted Daniel ever since. From that day forward, Malcolm never taught tactics before teaching character. Every decision began with one question. Who are you when nobody forces you to be honorable? Daniel had carried that lesson into every promotion, every command, every difficult decision. Even after becoming chief of police back in the present, Daniel closed the notebook. "He changed my life." Linda stared at him, and Brandon assaulted him. Daniel answered quietly, "No." He assaulted every value this department claims to represent. Meanwhile, Brandon remained completely unaware. He laughed with Jason in the patrol briefing room. "You should have seen the old guy's face." Jason chuckled. "I thought he was going to cry." "He almost did." Brandon leaned back. "Guys like him always fold." Before Jason could answer, Marcus Reed entered. The room immediately fell silent. Marcus placed a folder on Brandon's desk. "You need to withdraw your report." Brandon laughed. "Why would I?" "Because it's false." Jason rolled his eyes. "Here we go again." Marcus ignored him. "I've watched 4 separate videos. They all show the same thing. You escalated everything." Brandon stood. "You accusing me? I'm telling you the truth." Brandon stepped closer. "The truth is whatever the investigation proves." Marcus didn't move. "No. The truth exists long before investigations." The tension between them became almost unbearable. Other officers quietly stopped working. Nobody wanted to interrupt. Finally, Brandon smiled. "You always did have a hero complex." Marcus answered calmly. "And you always thought a badge could replace integrity." Without another word, Marcus walked away. Several younger officers exchanged uncertain glances. For the first time, cracks were beginning to appear inside Brandon's circle. Across town, Emily Carter continued digging into Malcolm's background. She expected to find military awards. Instead, she found almost nothing. No interviews, no speeches, no books, no social media, only scattered references buried inside decades-old Army leadership archives. One line caught her attention. Guest instructor, ethical command decision-making. Repeated dozens of times, different years, different law enforcement academies. Emily frowned. Why would an Army instructor be teaching police leadership? She kept searching. Another document appeared. A graduation photograph from 24 years earlier. Dozens of young police cadets stood proudly in formation. Near the center was a much younger Daniel Brooks. Standing beside him, Malcolm Hayes. Emily's heartbeat quickened. "No way." She enlarged the photograph. The caption underneath read, "Special Leadership Instructor Master Sergeant Malcolm Hayes." Emily immediately grabbed her phone. She called her newsroom. "Don't publish anything else yet. I think we've only uncovered half this story." At that exact moment, Daniel Brooks walked out of his office carrying Malcolm's old notebook. Every command officer standing in the hallway noticed the expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. The kind of disappointment reserved for someone who believed a sacred trust had been betrayed. Daniel stopped outside the conference room. He looked toward Captain Linda Morales. "I want every officer involved in today's incident present within 1 hour." Linda nodded. "Yes, Chief." "And Captain." She turned. "Find Malcolm Hayes. If he agrees to come." Daniel looked down at the notebook still resting in his hands. "I'd like the entire department to see the man who taught me what this badge is supposed to mean." No one in the hallway spoke, because every experienced officer recognized something profound had just changed. The investigation was no longer about a viral video. It had become personal. Officer Brandon Cole had always believed one simple rule governed every investigation. Control the first report, and you controlled the story. As evening settled over Savannah, he sat inside interview room 3 with an expression of complete confidence. He wasn't wearing handcuffs. He wasn't nervous. He thought this meeting was nothing more than a formality. Captain Linda Morales entered carrying a thick evidence folder. She placed it on the table without sitting down. "Officer Cole." Brandon smiled politely. "Captain." "I understand there's some public pressure because of the videos." Linda ignored the comment. "Walk me through exactly what happened." Brandon didn't hesitate. The subject became confrontational. He refused lawful commands. I feared he might become violent. So I used the minimum force necessary. Linda quietly took out a tablet. "What lawful command did he refuse?" Brandon paused. He refused to cooperate. Specifically, he questioned my authority. Linda looked up. "Questioning an officer isn't a crime." Brandon shifted slightly. "He created a hostile environment." Linda remained expressionless. "By doing what?" Brandon searched for an answer. "He intimidated me." The room fell silent. Linda slowly pressed play on the tablet. The first cell phone video began. Everyone watched Malcolm standing motionless while Brandon mocked him. The second video showed Brandon throwing the veteran ID into the mud. The third captured Brandon crushing the cap beneath his boot. The fourth clearly showed Brandon grabbing Malcolm's jacket first. Linda paused the recording. "Would you like to amend your statement?" Brandon forced a smile. Videos don't always show everything." "No, they don't." Linda tapped another file. But 4 different videos usually tell the same story. For the first time all afternoon, Brandon's confidence cracked. Meanwhile, Malcolm sat quietly on the front porch of his home. Angela brought him a cup of coffee. "You've barely spoken." "I've been thinking." "About today?" He nodded. "I keep asking myself where Brandon learned that humiliation was strength." Angela sat beside him. "You still refuse to hate him." Malcolm looked toward the sunset. "I've seen hatred. Yeah, I've buried young men because of it. I won't let one officer convince me everyone wearing a badge has forgotten who they're supposed to protect." Before Angela could answer, a black sedan slowly stopped outside the house. Captain Linda Morales stepped out. She removed her cap before walking toward the porch. "Mr. Hayes." Malcolm stood. "Captain." She extended her hand. "I'm here to apologize." "You don't owe me one. I represent the department. Today." "We failed you." Malcolm shook her hand. "You still have time to correct that." Linda took a slow breath. "The chief would like to meet you." "When?" "As soon as you're willing." Malcolm was silent for several moments. "I don't want special treatment." "Neither does he." "He wants the truth." Across town, Brandon wasn't finished trying to save himself. The moment his interview ended, he called Jason Miller. "We've got a problem." Jason frowned. "How bad?" "Worse than I thought." "What about Marcus?" Brandon's jaw tightened. "He stabbed me in the back." Jason lowered his voice. "What do we do?" Brandon looked around before answering. "We convince Malcolm to make this disappear." Jason blinked. "You think he'll agree?" "He looks like the forgiving type." Less than an hour later, Brandon parked outside Malcolm's neighborhood. Jason remained inside the patrol vehicle. "You sure about this?" Brandon adjusted his uniform. I'm giving him an opportunity to do what? Save both of us. He walked toward Malcolm's house. Angela saw him first through the living room window. Her expression immediately changed. Malcolm. He's here. Malcolm calmly opened the front door before Brandon could knock. The two men stood facing one another beneath the porch light. For several long seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Brandon forced an awkward smile. I figured we should talk. Malcolm remained silent. Brandon continued. You know, things got out of hand. They don't have to ruin both our lives. Malcolm looked directly into his eyes. What exactly are you asking? Brandon glanced around to make sure nobody else was listening. I'll admit I was rough. You agree not to file a complaint. We both move on. Malcolm stared at him in disbelief. You still don't understand. Brandon frowned. Understand what? This stopped being about me the moment you disgraced your badge. Brandon's smile disappeared. And don't make this bigger than it needs to be. Malcolm answered quietly. I didn't. You did. Brandon's patience snapped. You think you're some kind of hero? No. You think the department will choose you over one of its own? Malcolm didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked past Brandon toward the patrol car parked at the curb. Jason quickly looked away. Then Malcolm spoke. I spent my entire career teaching young leaders one lesson. Brandon folded his arms. Which is, when someone with power fears the truth, they usually stop asking for forgiveness and start demanding silence. Brandon's face hardened. Careful. That almost sounded like a threat. No, Malcolm replied. It sounded like experience. At that exact moment, headlights turned into the neighborhood. A black, unmarked SUV rolled slowly toward the house. Captain Linda Morales stepped out, followed by two internal affairs investigators. Brandon's stomach dropped. Linda looked directly at him. I was hoping we'd find you here. Brandon tried to recover. I was checking on the victim. Angela couldn't hide her disbelief. By asking him not to report you, Brandon turned pale. Linda spoke calmly. Officer Cole, you are not to contact Mr. Hayes again. Effective immediately. She handed him an official document. Pending the outcome of this investigation, your police powers are suspended. Brandon stared at the paper. His hands trembled slightly. You can't do this. Linda met his eyes. I already have. As Brandon walked back toward his patrol car, he glanced over his shoulder one last time. Malcolm hadn't celebrated. He hadn't smiled. He simply stood beside Angela, watching quietly. That calm, unsettled Brandon more than any punishment ever could. Because for the first time since throwing that punch, he realized the man he had tried to intimidate had never been afraid of him. Inside the black SUV, Linda turned toward Malcolm. The chief is waiting. Malcolm nodded once. I suppose it's finally time. Neither Brandon nor Jason knew what that meeting would reveal. But by sunrise, every officer in Savannah would learn that the quiet black veteran they had underestimated wasn't merely another retired soldier. He was the man whose words had shaped the conscience of the chief of police himself. The black SUV carrying Malcolm Hayes rolled through the secured entrance of Savannah Police Headquarters just after 8 o'clock that evening. The building buzzed with an uneasy silence. Word had already spread that Chief Daniel Brooks had personally ordered every command officer supervisor and every officer connected to the Memorial Plaza incident to report immediately. No one knew why. Brandon Cole stood near the back of the conference room, still wearing his uniform despite his temporary suspension. Jason Miller stood beside him, avoiding eye contact with everyone else. Marcus Reed remained alone. He wasn't interested in choosing sides anymore. Only the truth. The conference room doors opened. Captain Linda Morales entered first. Behind her walked Malcolm Hayes. His split lip had darkened into a deep bruise. His veteran's cap, though carefully reshaped, still carried the crease left by Brandon's boot. A ripple of whispers spread across the room. That's him. The veteran. What is he doing here? Brandon folded his arms and forced a laugh. So this is it. We're giving the victim a tour now? No one laughed with him. Captain Morales calmly guided Malcolm to the front of the room. Please wait here, Mr. Hayes. Malcolm simply nodded. He stood quietly with his hands folded in front of him, saying nothing. The room grew strangely tense. Brandon couldn't understand why. He looked around. Every command officer appeared unusually serious. Even Assistant Chief Harold Simmons avoided looking in his direction. Then the side door opened. Chief Daniel Brooks entered. Every officer instinctively stood. Daniel acknowledged them with a brief nod before his eyes settled on Malcolm. For several long seconds, he didn't speak. The room became so quiet that the faint hum of the ceiling lights could be heard. Brandon frowned. What was the chief waiting for? Then something happened that nobody inside the room expected. Daniel slowly walked across the room. He stopped directly in front of Malcolm. His eyes glistened, without a single word. He came to perfect military attention. His heels clicked sharply against the floor. Every officer stared in disbelief. Then Daniel raised his hand into a flawless salute. It wasn't casual. It wasn't symbolic. It was the kind of salute reserved for someone whose honor had earned lifelong respect. The silence became overwhelming. Brandon's smile disappeared. Jason's mouth slowly fell open. Marcus lowered his head. Daniel held the salute for several long seconds before speaking. Good evening. His voice carried unmistakable emotion. Master Sergeant Hayes. Malcolm returned the salute with equal precision. Good evening, Chief. Daniel lowered his hand. No. He smiled faintly. Tonight. I'm Daniel again. The room remained frozen. Brandon blinked repeatedly. He whispered to Jason. What is this? Jason couldn't answer. Daniel turned slowly toward the assembled officers. I want every person in this room to understand exactly who is standing beside me. He looked back at Malcolm. When I was 23 years old, I believed leadership meant being the strongest man in every room. He paused. I was wrong. This man taught me otherwise. Daniel picked up the worn leather notebook he had carried into the meeting. He held it high enough for everyone to see. I've kept this notebook for 29 years. The lessons inside built every promotion I ever earned. My first patrol, my first command, my oath as chief. He gently opened the first page. Lead yourself before you lead others. Daniel looked toward Brandon. I didn't write that. He did. Every eye turned toward Malcolm. Brandon's breathing became shallow. Daniel continued. When I lost my temper during military leadership training, Master Sergeant Malcolm Hayes didn't punish me. He handed me a mirror. And he said something I have never forgotten. Daniel looked directly at Malcolm. A man who cannot control his anger will eventually surrender his character. Malcolm smiled quietly. You remembered. I remember every word, Daniel answered. He slowly faced the room again. I have trained thousands of officers. I have promoted hundreds. But every principle I demanded from every badge in this department began with him. His voice grew firmer. So when one of my officers struck the man who taught me integrity, he struck the very foundation of everything this department claims to stand for. A heavy silence followed. Brandon felt every pair of eyes in the room shift toward him. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. He forced himself to speak. "Chief, I didn't know who he was." Daniel turned sharply. His expression hardened for the first time all evening. "No, you didn't. And that is precisely the problem." He took one slow step closer. "If your respect depends on knowing someone's title, then you never understood respect to begin with." Brandon swallowed hard. Daniel cut him off. "Did Mr. Hayes deserve dignity only because he trained me?" Brandon said nothing. "Or did he deserve dignity because he is a human being?" No answer came. Daniel's voice echoed across the silent room. "The badge on your chest was never intended to decide who deserves respect. It was supposed to remind you that everyone already does." No officer moved. No one even seemed to breathe. For the first time in his career, Brandon Cole realized this wasn't merely an internal affairs investigation anymore. This was the collapse of every excuse he had built around himself. And Daniel Brooks wasn't finished. He slowly placed Malcolm's old leadership notebook on the conference table. Then he looked toward Captain Linda Morales. "Captain, I believe everyone here deserves to see the rest of the evidence." Linda nodded once. She picked up the remote. The giant screen behind her flickered to life. "Let's begin with the full, unedited recording." The conference room lights dimmed. Every eye turned toward the giant screen mounted on the wall. Captain Linda Morales pressed play. Unlike the clips circulating online, this was a synchronized recording compiled from 4 civilian cell phones, 1 television news camera, nearby surveillance footage, and every available police body camera. There would be no missing seconds, no selective angles, no room for excuses. The recording began with Malcolm quietly laying a white rose beneath the veteran's memorial. No confrontation, no disturbance, no raised voice. Then Brandon Cole walked into frame. The room watched in complete silence as he demanded identification. The footage clearly showed Malcolm immediately handing over his driver's license without hesitation. Next came Brandon pulling the veteran identification card from Malcolm's wallet. Officer Jason Miller could be seen grinning in the background. Then everyone watched Brandon deliberately flick the veteran card into the mud. The sound of the card landing was almost inaudible, but inside the conference room, it echoed like thunder. Daniel Brooks never looked away from the screen. His jaw remained clenched. Captain Morales let the video continue. Brandon's voice filled the room. "You know what I see? Just another old black man hiding behind a cheap cap." Several officers lowered their heads. Another clip immediately followed. Brandon crushing Malcolm's veteran cap beneath his polished boot. The room remained silent. Then came the moment everyone dreaded. The punch, frame by frame. Slow motion. Every angle. Brandon grabbed Malcolm's jacket first. Malcolm never raised a hand, never threatened, never advanced. Then Brandon's fist connected. The image froze at the exact instant of impact. Captain Morales turned toward the room. "Can anyone here identify a lawful justification for this use of force?" Nobody answered. Not a single voice. She looked directly at Brandon. "Officer Cole." Brandon swallowed. The situation escalated quickly. Captain Morales pressed another button. The screen changed. Brandon's official report appeared beside the video. On the left was his written statement. On the right was the footage. Sentence after sentence collapsed under the evidence. Subject refused commands. The video showed Malcolm cooperating immediately. Subject became physically aggressive. The video showed Malcolm standing perfectly still. Minimal force used in self-defense. The footage showed Brandon initiating every physical contact. The contrast was devastating. Daniel finally spoke. "Turn it off." The screen went black. Silence filled the room once again. Daniel slowly walked toward Brandon. Every step echoed across the polished floor. Brandon could no longer meet his eyes. "Look at me." Daniel's voice was calm. Brandon slowly raised his head. Daniel didn't shout. He didn't insult him. His disappointment was far more painful. "I spent 29 years trying to build a department that citizens could trust." He pointed toward Malcolm. "You nearly destroyed that trust in less than 3 minutes." Brandon's voice trembled. "Chief, I'm sorry." Daniel immediately replied, "No. You're sorry because you were exposed. You weren't sorry when you thought nobody important was watching." Those words struck harder than any suspension order ever could. Brandon opened his mouth again. "I didn't know who he was." Daniel shook his head. "I've already answered that. The tragedy isn't that you failed to recognize my mentor. The tragedy is that you believed an elderly black veteran with worn boots deserved less dignity because you thought he had no influence." The room remained absolutely still. Captain Harold Simmons quietly removed Brandon's service weapon from the evidence table. He placed it inside a sealed evidence case. No announcement, no ceremony, just another painful reminder that trust once broken must be earned again. Marcus Reed finally stepped forward. "Chief." Daniel looked at him. Marcus placed his own written report onto the conference table. "I should have stopped it sooner. I knew Brandon's behavior was getting worse. I convinced myself someone else would deal with it." He looked toward Malcolm. "For that, I'm deeply sorry." Malcolm walked over. Instead of criticizing Marcus, he extended his hand. Marcus looked surprised. "You told the truth," Malcolm said quietly. "Sometimes courage arrives later than it should, but it still matters." Marcus shook his hand with visible emotion. "I won't forget that." Emily Carter, who had been granted permission to observe the administrative hearing as part of the public transparency process, quietly lowered her notebook. She realized this story had become much larger than a single officer's misconduct. It had become a lesson about leadership itself. Captain Morales then opened one final folder. "There is one additional matter." She placed several disciplinary files onto the table. "Our investigation uncovered 5 prior citizen complaints involving Officer Cole." Brandon's face drained of color. Each complaint alleged unnecessary verbal humiliation. Each complaint was dismissed without full review. Daniel slowly turned toward Assistant Chief Harold Simmons. "Were you aware of these complaints?" Harold hesitated. "They were handled through normal channels." Daniel's expression hardened. "No. They were ignored." Harold lowered his head. Daniel looked around the room. "This department will not only investigate the officer who threw the punch. We will investigate every supervisor who allowed this pattern to continue." The announcement stunned the command staff. Several captains exchanged nervous glances. The investigation had just expanded far beyond Brandon Cole. Daniel faced Malcolm once more. "I owe you something," Malcolm quietly interrupted. "You don't owe me revenge." Daniel nodded. "I know. I owe this city accountability." He looked toward every officer in the room. "Effective immediately." Officer Brandon Cole is terminated from the Savannah Police Department. Gasps filled the conference room. Daniel continued before anyone could speak. Captain Linda Morales, forward this entire case to the district attorney. Recommend criminal charges for assault under color of authority, falsification of an official report, and obstruction of an administrative investigation. Yes, Chief. Brandon's knees nearly gave way. Jason Miller closed his eyes. Harold Simmons stared silently at the floor. The room had witnessed not only the end of one officer's career, but the beginning of a complete reckoning inside the department. Daniel turned toward Malcolm one final time. There is only one thing left to do. Malcolm looked at him with quiet curiosity. Daniel smiled for the first time that evening. And the whole city deserves to witness it. The following Saturday, Veterans Memorial Plaza looked very different. Only a week earlier, it had been the place where humiliation echoed louder than honor. Today, it had become the place where truth would finally speak. Hundreds of residents filled the square. Veterans from every branch of the military stood shoulder to shoulder in neatly pressed uniforms. Police officers lined both sides of the memorial, their dress uniforms immaculate, their hats tucked respectfully beneath their arms. Television cameras broadcast the ceremony live across Georgia. At precisely 10 o'clock, Mayor Susan Whitmore stepped to the podium. My fellow citizens, she began, last week, this city witnessed a moment that brought shame to a profession built on public trust. She paused. But today we gather to prove that one officer's failure will not define an entire community. Applause spread through the crowd. The mayor turned toward Malcolm Hayes. Mr. Hayes, would you please join us? Malcolm slowly walked toward the stage. He wore the same faded jacket, the same carefully restored veteran's cap. The bruise beneath his eye had begun to fade, but it remained visible enough to remind everyone why they were there. As he reached the podium, every veteran in attendance rose to attention, one by one. They saluted. The crowd followed with a standing ovation that seemed to grow louder every second. Malcolm looked across the sea of faces. Some were smiling, others wiped away tears. He never expected any of this, nor had he ever wanted it. Mayor Whitmore stepped aside. Chief Brooks, Daniel walked to the microphone. For several moments, he simply looked at Malcolm. Then he faced the crowd. Last week, I apologized to Mr. Hayes as chief of police. He shook his head. Today, I apologize as one of his students. The plaza fell completely silent. Daniel held up the old leather notebook. I have carried these lessons for 29 years. Every officer who has ever served under my command has benefited from the wisdom inside these pages. He looked toward Malcolm. The public deserves to know something. When I was young, I believed leadership meant commanding people. Master Sergeant Hayes taught me that leadership begins with serving them. Daniel's voice grew heavier. The badge I wear today exists because a soldier chose patience instead of pride. He stepped away from the podium and stood directly in front of Malcolm. With both hands, he presented the notebook back to its original owner. It belongs with you. Malcolm looked down at the worn cover. He smiled softly. No. It belongs wherever those lessons continue to serve others. Daniel's eyes glistened. I understand. Captain Linda Morales approached the podium next. By authority granted under departmental policy and state law, Officer Brandon Cole has been permanently dismissed from the Savannah Police Department, she continued. The complete investigative file has been transferred to the district attorney's office. Additional administrative proceedings are underway regarding supervisory failures identified during this investigation. Several reporters immediately began taking notes. Justice had moved beyond words. It now carried consequences. Then came the announcement nobody expected. Mayor Whitmore unfolded a second document. After consultation with the City Council, the Police Department, and the Veterans Commission, we are proud to establish a permanent leadership program for every new police recruit. She smiled toward Malcolm. It will be known as the Malcolm Hayes Leadership and Integrity Initiative. The crowd erupted. Police recruits applauded. Veterans applauded. Families applauded. Even many officers who had never met Malcolm before found themselves cheering. Daniel leaned toward Malcolm. I wish every recruit could have met you 29 years ago. Malcolm smiled. They still can. Not through me. Through what they choose to become. Later that afternoon, inside the Police Academy auditorium, nearly 200 recruits gathered for the first orientation session under the new program. At the front of the room stood Malcolm. No medals covered his jacket. No spotlight followed him. He carried only the old notebook. He looked at the young faces waiting for him. Some dreamed of becoming detectives. Some hoped to join SWAT. Others simply wanted to serve their communities. Malcolm opened the notebook. This book isn't about tactics. It isn't about winning fights. It isn't even about policing. He looked around the room. It's about character. He paused. The easiest person to protect is someone important. The hardest is the stranger who can do absolutely nothing for you. The room remained perfectly still. If your respect changes after you learn someone's title, then your respect was never real. Several recruits quietly wrote those words down. Daniel watched from the back of the auditorium. He didn't interrupt. He simply listened, just as he had done decades earlier. Some lessons never grew old. As the ceremony ended, Emily Carter approached Malcolm one last time. May I ask you a final question? He nodded. When Officer Cole punched you, were you ever tempted to hit him back? Malcolm smiled gently. Of course. I'm human. So what stopped you? He looked toward the academy entrance where dozens of recruits were laughing together. Because someone is always watching. Sometimes it's a child. Sometimes it's a future leader. And sometimes it's the person you'll inspire long after you're gone. Emily lowered her microphone. She realized there was nothing she could add that would make those words more powerful. They spoke for themselves. As Malcolm and Angela walked hand in hand toward the parking lot, the afternoon sun reflected off the rows of American flags surrounding the memorial. Behind them stood a police department determined to rebuild trust. Ahead of them walked a man who had never needed a badge, a title, or public recognition to demonstrate true leadership. Because long before he taught a chief of police how to lead others, he had already mastered the far more difficult task of leading himself.
True character is revealed when no one knows your name, your title, or your accomplishments. Respect should never depend on someone's appearance, status, or influence. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories about courage, justice, and the quiet strength that changes lives.